A train that crashed 50 years ago runs again through the winter mountains, and this time it carries not passengers, but their shadows. The last ride of the Northern Express.
Snow fell on Colorado so heavily that the mountains looked like silent ghosts draped in a white shroud. By evening, the blizzard had grown stronger, and the wind carried a thin wail through the canyon like the sound of a distant siren. Old men in the town of Winter's Ridge always said, "When you hear that whistle, it isn't the wind, it's the Northern Express, a train that should not exist." Half a century ago, it derailed. A freight train with passenger cars attached plunged into the canyon, dragging dozens of lives with it. The bodies were never found. Snow buried everything in a matter of hours. Since then, every winter, someone swears they've seen lights on the slope, heard wheels and the squeal of brakes. Most residents prefer to dismiss it. Legend hurts less than truth. Liam O'Connor had heard these stories many times. A mountain rescue worker, he did not believe in ghosts, but he knew too well how the mountains kept secrets. 2 years ago, an avalanche had taken his daughter, Emily. He had been right there, yet had not managed to pull her from the rushing snow. Since then, guilt would not release him, and his work as a rescuer had become his punishment. That evening, he was returning from duty, the date cut like a blade, the anniversary of the avalanche. The siren on his radio suddenly stretched into a long drone, and Liam could not tell, was it a signal or the echo of a phantom train? He lifted his head and saw a light at the old station. As he drew closer, the frozen windows reflected his image. Cracked ice shattered his face into fragments like a broken mirror. For a moment, it seemed his reflection blinked out of sync with his own gaze. Through the curtain of snow emerged the silhouette of a carriage. Glass windows shimmered as if lit from within. On the platform stood a conductor in a long coat. Mirrored glasses on his face reflected the station lights, but in the next second he dissolved, leaving only footprints that the snow erased at once. Liam froze. Panic, mixed with hope, rose in his chest. The wind carried a faint whisper of his name. The voice was too familiar to turn away from. He stepped onto the platform. The storm hushed, as if the mountain itself held its breath. Before him stood a train that should not have been.
Liam climbed the step, and the carriage door creaked as though it had been waiting only for him. Warmth struck his face. Inside smelled of coal and old wood. The contrast with the blizzard was so sharp he felt he had stepped into a dream. The carriage was filled with muffled silence. On the seats sat passengers, each seemingly from a different time. A man in a worn suit flipped through a newspaper dated 1973. A girl with headphones slid her finger across a phone screen, though the cord was severed. An old woman clutched a ticket so faded its text could not be read. Their gazes were strangely vacant, as though they waited for something they could not name. Liam sat across from a woman in her 40s, with delicate features. In her hand lay a small child's mitten, worn as if carried for decades. She smiled and said enigmatically, "This road does not lead where you think." Liam wanted to ask what she meant, but at that moment a man in military uniform sat beside him, introducing himself as Martin. His eyes were tired yet clear. "I keep searching for my brother," he said, holding a dog tag on his knees. "We served together. I came back, but he stayed there, underground. I thought I could find him here." He fell silent, clenching his fist. "But the train only teases, shows faces, never lets you touch them." "Why do you keep riding?" Liam asked. Martin sighed. "Because I don't know who I'll be if I stop searching. Maybe none of us do." Their talk was cut short by the conductor. In his long coat, he checked tickets, silently, with pedantic precision. When he leaned toward Liam, his mirrored glasses reflected the rescuer's face. The reflection blinked, out of sync with Liam himself. The conductor nodded, as if knowing his secret, and moved on. The train picked up speed. Liam understood. There was no way back.
The train plunged deeper into the mountains, and the longer the journey lasted, the more the reality outside the windows warped. At first, Liam thought it was only the storm playing tricks, but soon the snowy slopes vanished, giving way to scenes that could not belong to these places. He saw a street bathed in orange lamplight, where a schoolboy ran after a bus. Then a dark alley with a sign whose letters of a familiar city were fading. Later, cemetery gates, behind which motionless figures waited for this train. Liam peered closer and saw himself among the scenes. He stood in his rescuer's uniform, clutching a rope, while an avalanche carried away a figure in a red jacket. The image vanished, but his heart thudded. The train did not only show others, it was drawing him in. The passengers, too, were riveted to their windows. The man with the newspaper wept, watching a woman wave from a porch. The girl with headphones shook her head, seeing a phone with a cracked screen. Their lips whispered names, excuses, pleas. The conductor appeared again. In his hand was an old punch. Each click of the jaws sounded like the echo of a heartbeat. Liam noticed that after each snap, the window of one passenger dimmed, and the scene outside paled, as if the memory was being taken back. He turned to the woman with the mitten, Ellen. She spoke softly. "The train does not give. It returns what you are clinging to." Liam's heart tightened. Amid the clatter of wheels, he heard a voice, too familiar. "Daddy!" He whipped his head toward the window. For a moment, the avalanche reappeared. A small figure stretched out its hands to him. The vision lasted only seconds, but it echoed his entire guilt. He rushed into the next carriage, hoping to catch that image. But beyond the door lay new spaces, other reflections, other shadows. The train was not taking them to a destination. It was carrying them deeper into what they refused to let go. Liam moved from carriage to carriage, hoping to hear his daughter's voice again. Each new compartment opened lives frozen in their own losses. In one sat a young soldier clutching blood-stained letters. In another, a bride in a wedding dress, her face wax pale. None noticed Liam. All were bound to their grief. By the door stood Martin. His shoulders trembled, not from cold. He spoke without raising his eyes from the tag in his hand. "We were supposed to go together,
My brother begged me to switch watch with him, but I was tired and refused. That night, the column hit a mine. He was gone, and I've carried this tag ever since. I keep thinking if I had agreed, everything would have been different. He looked at Liam. Tell me, if you had a second chance, could you choose right? The words cut deeper than any avalanche. Liam found no answer. Ahead lay the groaning link between carriages. Outside, the storm howled, icy wind slapping his face. He gripped the frozen rail, crossing the swaying joint. For a moment, it seemed the train would hurl him down, but he reached the next door and yanked it open. Ellen awaited inside. She still clutched the child's mitten. This time, her voice was weary. I lost my son, not in a disaster, not in an avalanche, just in a winter without a date. He vanished, and no one could explain how. Since then, I've been here. Her eyes were too clear for the dead, and too empty for the living. Liam could not tell. Was she a passenger or part of the train itself? He wanted to ask, but the words stuck. Ahead, again, came that voice, thin, childlike, calling. Emily! The train rushed on, and Liam felt time slipping away. The corridor led Liam toward the front. The metal beneath his feet throbbed, as if the train itself warned him. Before the locomotive door, he stopped. The polished wall reflected his face. A handprint pressed against it, the same he had laid on the glass of the first carriage, but now it was dark, alive. He pushed the door open. The cabin was empty. Instead of levers and gauges stood a great mirror, veined with cracks. Liam froze. In it, he saw himself, worn and weary. Behind him appeared Emily's figure. He stepped closer, and the mirror shivered as if in response. The urge rose in his chest to scream, to justify himself, but what broke out was simpler confessions. I was there, but I wasn't fast enough. I held the rope, but it slipped away. I couldn't. Each word resounded in the cracks, the lines spreading wider. The figure of the girl looked not with reproach, but with expectation. Steps behind him. Ellen entered, the mitten still in her hand. She looked straight at him and asked, "How does her laughter sound without your fear?" Liam shut his eyes. Memory flared. Not snow, but a sunny day. Emily on her bicycle, laughing, clear, light. The sound was so pure, his heart trembled. He opened his eyes, and the mirror began to dissolve, its cracks crumbling into glowing dust. His daughter's figure smiled, fading into the radiance. The train shuddered, wheels faltering. For the first time, it was not accelerating, but slowing. Liam touched the glass, now cold and still. In the silence, he heard only his own breath. The express was losing power, and Liam knew. The heart of the train had stopped beating with his fear. The train shook, as if resisting the slowdown. Carriage after carriage filled with a hum like the cry of many voices. Liam stood at the blank mirror in the locomotive, feeling his decision echo through the entire train. Wheels screeched, metal grated, yet the speed ebbed. Final visions flickered in the windows. Soldier Martin saw his brother and, dropping the tag, dissolved with him. The girl with headphones smiled and vanished, as if at last hearing the right melody. The bride melted into light. But not all departed. An elderly passenger with the faded ticket only shook his head. "I've waited too long. If I step out now, there's nothing. I'll stay." His silhouette merged with the carriage, part of the train itself. Liam realized the choice was not the same for everyone. Ellen drew nearer. Her form grew translucent but did not vanish. The mitten in her hand remained sharply real. She looked at Liam as though about to speak, but only smiled. Whether she had found release or had always been bound to this ride remained unclear. The locomotive trembled. The mirror shattered into frost, tiny crystals falling on Liam's face, clinging to his lashes. He blinked, and the frost melted, as if with it the weight had gone. The train stopped at an empty, snowbound platform. The wind wailed overhead, but it was only wind now, with no voices within. Liam stepped outside. The platform lay deserted, only traces of fading shadows leading into the white distance. He drew a deep breath. Memory still lived in his chest, but guilt no longer ruled him. The Northern Express had made its last ride, yet its echo might linger in the mountains for long. Winter in Colorado returned as usual. Snow lay on rooftops, roads turned to white trails, mountain peaks vanished into storms. For Liam, the season was no longer the same. He worked again in rescue service. Once they were called to a tourist trapped in a crevice. Liam descended on a rope, icy stone burning his palms through the gloves. He grasped the man's hand and pulled upward. The skin was cold, fingers numb, but at his touch the grip revived. That moment, the weight of the rope, the tremor in his arms, was more real than any vision. Back in town, Liam paused by a puddle of meltwater at the roadside. The water reflected his face calmly, without cracks or distortions. For a second, he heard a faint horn in the reflection, not ominous, but steady, like the echo of memory. He blinked, and the sound was gone. A few days later, he returned to the abandoned station. Snow had covered the platform, rails barely visible under the crust. On the bench lay a small child's mitten. Beside it, a military dog tag. No footprints, no sign of anyone's visit. Liam picked up the mitten, held it for a moment, then gently set it back. The wind rose, but now its howling was simply the music of winter. The mountains stood silent, and in that silence was not emptiness, but peace. Liam walked down the trail without looking back. On the station remained only the mitten and the tag, signs that not everything on this ride was finished. The mountains were mute, and that silence became his answer.